Welcome to Fearful Frequencies, where every story is a signal from the shadows. Tune in, if you dare, and let the whispers of the unknown send chills down your spine. But beware, once you hear the haunting echoes of these tales, you may never listen to the silence the same way again. If you enjoy these stories, consider subscribing on Patreon at www.patreon.com/fearfulfrequencies. Link in description. So, in the dead of night, when the world is silent and shadows grow long, there are frequencies that tap into our deepest fears. Gather yourself and listen. This story is called The Unfolding Descent. I wake up every morning at 6:45 a.m., not a second earlier, not a second later. My body has been trained, conditioned even, by the repetition of countless days bleeding into each other. The phone's alarm chimes precisely at 6:45, but it never gets the chance to ring anymore. I'm awake before it starts, lying there in that peculiar pre-dawn darkness where the world is still but my mind is already buzzing. It's always buzzing. I don't know when this routine became so ingrained in me. Probably around the time I started working from home full-time. The nature of programming requires structure, precision, and logic, something I've always appreciated. I start my day by brewing coffee, 3 scoops of beans, ground exactly the way I like. The kitchen, like the rest of the apartment, is organized down to the smallest detail. There's comfort in knowing exactly where things are and how they should be. It's control, or at least it was. Work begins at 8 thou sharp. I sit in front of my computer, in the corner of the living room that I've converted into a home office. 4 monitors, one for code, another for documentation, the third for testing environments, and the last one for emails and communication. The monitors sit on my desk, the angles sharp and crisp, lines and edges so perfectly drawn it feels reassuring. The clean mathematical certainty of it all used to soothe me. But lately, something feels wrong. Something small, minuscule even. The way the light from my desk lamp casts shadows across the walls. They don't seem to hit where they should. Angles don't line up. I've caught myself staring at them for longer than I'd care to admit. There's a disconnect between what I know should be true and what my eyes are seeing. It was on the second Monday in September that I first really noticed the change. I was typing away, fixing a few bugs on the back-end code of a client project, when I felt this unease creeping in. It wasn't obvious at first, more like the way an itch starts in the back of your throat before you realize you're getting sick. I looked at the corner of the room, where the wall meets the floor, and something about the way the lines converged there felt wrong. It was off. I couldn't place exactly how, but the corner wasn't as it should be. I stood up, walking over to it, squinting, trying to measure the angle with my eyes. 90 degrees. It should be a 90-degree angle. That's how rooms are built. But the more I looked, the more it felt like it wasn't. Maybe 89 or 91. The difference was so slight that I couldn't tell if I was imagining it, but the longer I stared, the more uncomfortable I felt. A quiet panic started to grow in my chest, something entirely irrational but too persistent to shake. I convinced myself it was just a trick of the light. Maybe the shadows were messing with my perception. That made sense. I went back to work, but the feeling lingered. I tried to focus, diving deep into my tasks, but the numbers and symbols in my code started to blur together. For the first time in years, logic itself felt tenuous. Over the next few days, the odd sensation grew. The angles in my apartment, the walls, the furniture, everything seemed slightly off. At first, I'd just brush it off as nothing. But I'm a programmer. I deal in logic, precision, and predictability. These things shouldn't be off. I bought a protractor, one of those old ones I hadn't used since school. I spent an evening measuring the angles of every room in my apartment. 90 degrees every time. Perfect. But it didn't feel perfect. I tried to ignore it. Tried to go back to my routine, waking up at 6:45, coffee at 7, work at 8. But each day I found myself scrutinizing the lines of my walls, the edges of objects, the ways they met and interacted. One night, I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding in my chest, convinced that the corners of my bedroom had shifted while I was asleep. I flicked on the light, grabbing the protractor from my bedside drawer, and checked again. Still 90 degrees. And yet, something had changed. I could feel it. It was as if the world was mocking me with its consistency, but underneath that, something else was creeping in, a crack in the foundation of my reality. Days turned into weeks. My routines began to slip, little by little. I started getting up later, sometimes 6:50, sometimes 7. Nothing drastic, but enough to make me notice. I would skip breakfast some mornings. Other times I'd forget to turn on my work computer until well after 9 now. My focus was fracturing. All I could think about were those damned angles. I'd walk around the city, and it wasn't just my apartment anymore. Buildings, streets, even the layout of sidewalks seemed wrong. The lines of skyscrapers leaned ever so slightly inward, their geometric perfection just a bit skewed. I tried explaining it to someone once. David, a guy from my programming team who I sometimes chatted with over Slack. I mentioned the feeling in passing, joking that maybe I'd been staring at code for too long, but I could tell he didn't get it. "We all lose track of time when we're deep in a project, man. Just take a break," he said. But it wasn't just time I was losing track of. It was space itself. Things escalated slowly, almost imperceptibly, but by the end of the second month I couldn't ignore it anymore. I'd walk into my kitchen, and the refrigerator would seem taller than the day before. The hallway to my bedroom felt just a hair longer, like it stretched farther into some unseen distance. I measured it, of course. I measured everything. Nothing had changed, yet everything felt distorted. I started dreaming about numbers, long, unbroken strings of code that twisted into impossible shapes in my mind. And in those dreams, I could see the source of the corruption. It wasn't me. It was the world around me. The geometry of reality itself was unraveling, slowly, methodically, in ways that only I could perceive. I'd wake up sweating, gasping for breath, my heart hammering in my chest as if I'd just been running for my life. That's when I realized maybe I was. At some point, logic itself started to betray me. I tried to calculate my grocery budget one evening, but no matter how many times I added up the numbers, they wouldn't align. 12 plus 8 became 22, and then 15. 3x4 gave me a different result every time. The basic rules of arithmetic, the fundamental truths I had built my career and life around, were slipping away from me. And yet, every time I checked with a calculator, the answer was normal, rational. I wasn't losing my mind. I knew I wasn't. It was the world that was coming apart at the seams. It wasn't until last night that I fully understood what was happening. I was sitting in the living room, staring at the far corner where the ceiling meets the walls. For the longest time, I had felt that something was off. And then, in that quiet, heavy moment, I saw it. The corner wasn't a corner anymore. It wasn't just an illusion or a trick of perception. The angle was wrong, tangibly wrong. It was subtle at first, just a shift in the shadows. But then the line where the ceiling met the walls began to bend, curving in ways that shouldn't be possible. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, but it didn't go away. The corner stretched, as though reality itself was being pulled apart, and I could feel a pressure in my chest like something was pushing back at me from the inside. I stood up, backing away, but the distortion only grew. It wasn't just the corner anymore. The entire room was warping, the angles twisting into grotesque shapes that defied logic. My mind raced to understand, to apply some kind of mathematical sense to it, but nothing worked. No formula, no equation could explain what I was seeing. I tried to reach for my phone, to call someone, anyone, but my hand wouldn't move. It was as if the air itself had thickened, trapping me in place. The world around me continued to contort, the walls now bending and folding in on themselves, the lines of my apartment stretching into infinity. And in the center of it all, there was something dark, something primal. I couldn't see it, not clearly, but I could feel it. It was as if the very fabric of reality was straining under the weight of its presence. My mind reeled as I tried to comprehend, but all I could sense was its hunger. It wasn't a ghost, not a demon. It was something older, something that existed long before our understanding of the world. And then, all at once, I understood. This thing, this entity, it had been here all along. It had been watching, waiting, warping the space around me little by little, feeding on my confusion, my fear. The distortions weren't random. They were deliberate. It was reshaping the world around me, slowly bending it to its will. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My body was frozen, my mind trapped in a spiral of terror as the entity wrapped itself around me, pulling me deeper into its madness. I could feel it inside my head, its thoughts mingling with mine, warping my logic, breaking down the rules that had governed my world. It was as though reality itself was crumbling, and I was the only one who could see it. The walls of the apartment were no longer recognizable. They twisted and bent at impossible angles, some spiraling into black voids, others folding back on themselves in endless loops. I could see the numbers now, endless streams of equations and symbols that made no sense, their meaning lost to some ancient, primal chaos. I don't know how long I stood there, trapped in that nightmare of angles and shadows. Time itself seemed to lose meaning. Seconds felt like hours, hours like days. And all the while, the entity inside me grew stronger, its presence seeping deeper into my mind, unraveling everything I knew. Eventually, something snapped. I don't know if it was in the world or in me, but the tension broke. The twisted geometry of my apartment stopped shifting. The endless numbers faded, and I was left standing in the center of a room that looked normal again. But I knew it wasn't. I wasn't. I'm still here, still living in this apartment. The angles don't seem wrong anymore, but I know they are. The world looks the same, but it isn't. Something has changed. I've changed. It's quiet now, but I can feel it. Deep inside, that dark, ancient presence. It's become a part of me, warping my perception, bending my thoughts. I don't know what it wants, but I can sense its hunger. And I know, sooner or later, it will take more. For now, I try to maintain my routine. I wake up at 6:45, brew my coffee at 7, sit down to work at 8. But every now and then, I catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. A shadow that moves when it shouldn't, an angle that doesn't quite add up. And in those moments, I know, it's still here, waiting. I keep telling myself that I'm imagining things, that it's all in my head. But deep down, I know the truth. The entity is still watching me, manipulating the world in ways I can't fully comprehend. It's patient. It knows I can't resist forever. The worst part is no one else sees it. Not my colleagues, not the few friends I still talk to, not even the strangers I pass on the street. To them, everything looks normal. But when I walk down the sidewalk, I can feel the subtle bends and warps in space. I can see the buildings twisting ever so slightly, as though they're being stretched and pulled by invisible hands. I tried to leave the city once. I packed a bag, booked a ticket, and drove to the airport. But the further I got from my apartment, the worse the feeling became. The angles didn't just stop at my front door. They followed me. Every building, every road, every intersection felt wrong, like the whole city was one massive, distorted labyrinth. I couldn't leave. I couldn't escape. The entity wouldn't let me. So I came back. Back to the apartment where it all started, where the angles first began to twist, where the walls first started to bend. I sit here now, typing this, trying to put into words what's happening to me. But words are failing. Logic is failing. Everything is failing. I don't know how long I have left before it fully takes over, before I lose myself completely. But I can feel it coming. I can feel the world unraveling around me, bit by bit, piece by piece. Maybe this is what it wants, to break me down, to erase everything I know, until there's nothing left but chaos. Maybe it's always been here, lurking in the spaces between things, waiting for someone like me to notice it. I just hope that when it finally takes me, I'll still have enough of myself left to understand why. But deep down, I suspect that understanding won't matter. Not anymore. Not when the rules of reality no longer apply, and everything I've ever known becomes nothing more than abstract shapes and numbers swirling in the void. I try not to think too much about it, about what comes next, but it's hard. Hard to ignore the creeping sensation that I'm just a vessel now, carrying something I'll never fully comprehend. I keep working. I keep living. Routine gives the illusion of control, and that's something I cling to, though I know it's meaningless. Every day, the edges of reality blur a little more. The walls stretch a little farther, the corners grow sharper, and sometimes I swear I can hear something moving just beyond the boundaries of my perception. Something scraping at the edges of my mind, waiting for the moment to break through. I catch myself staring into space for hours, thinking about the angles, obsessing over them, trying to understand what they mean, what they want. It's always been about the angles, hasn't it? They were the first sign, the first crack in the illusion of normalcy. I can see that now, even if I can't fully grasp the why of it. I no longer sleep properly. The nightmares are constant now, filled with impossible shapes and spirals of numbers that twist and stretch into infinity. And at the center of it all is that thing, the entity, the presence that's been with me all along, warping the world around me to suit its purposes. I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending to be normal. How much longer I can keep up this routine of waking, working, and existing in a world that no longer makes sense. Eventually, it will consume me. I know this. The question is, will anyone notice? Will anyone see the moment when I finally slip beyond the threshold of sanity? Or will I just disappear, lost in the endless spiral of angles that shouldn't exist? I suppose that's the real horror of it all, not the entity itself, not the warping of reality, but the possibility that no one will ever know. I'll be gone, swallowed up by the madness, and the world will keep turning, unaffected. My absence will be just another blip, another insignificant detail, as easily ignored as a missing piece of furniture in a room full of unfamiliar faces. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if that's what it wants. To erase me, to dissolve me into the folds of space and time like I never existed. Maybe I'm just a means to an end, a doorway it's trying to pry open. Maybe I've always been. I hear it sometimes, in the walls. A low, resonant hum, like the vibration of a distant, hidden machine. It pulses through the apartment, in rhythm with my thoughts, growing louder when I'm alone. It's in those moments I feel closest to understanding, like I'm on the verge of a revelation, a glimpse into something ancient and vast, something I can't fully grasp. But then the hum stops. Silence presses in, and I'm left staring at the same twisted angles, the same shifting walls, knowing that it's waiting for me to figure it out. Or maybe it's waiting for me to give in. I used to think that if I could just solve it, if I could just decode the patterns, I might stop this. But now I'm not sure there's anything left to solve. Maybe I'm not meant to understand. Maybe understanding is the final step before the fall, the point at which I cross over completely and become part of whatever this is. I don't know how much longer I can hold on, but I'm still here. For now. For now, I cling to the remnants of my life, the routines, the fleeting moments of clarity where everything seems almost normal. But even those moments are becoming scarce. The world feels thinner, as if reality itself is wearing down, fraying at the edges like an old piece of cloth stretched too far. And the more I think about it, the more I realize I'm unraveling too. It's in the little things. The way my reflection sometimes lags in the mirror, like I'm watching someone else's movements instead of my own. The way my thoughts drift, pulling me away from my tasks without warning, leaving me standing in the middle of a room, staring at nothing, with no memory of how I got there. I don't talk to people much anymore. I've isolated myself almost entirely. It's safer that way. If anyone were to look too closely, they might see the cracks, the places where I'm starting to break apart. And I can't let that happen. Not yet. Not until I understand what it wants from me. Sometimes I wonder if it's already too late, if I'm already too far gone. There are moments, brief, terrifying moments, when I'm not sure if the thoughts in my head are mine anymore. When I catch myself thinking things, imagining things that feel foreign, alien, dark shapes and whispers that have no place in a rational mind. And then there are the dreams. Always the same now, impossible geometry, endless loops, and at the center that same presence, watching, waiting. It's closer now. I can feel it. It doesn't need to hide anymore. It knows I've seen it. It knows I'm trapped. I wonder, sometimes, what it will feel like when it finally takes me. Will it be quick? Or will it be slow, like the angles, creeping in at the edges until there's nothing left of me but fragments of thought, twisted and broken, stretched across some incomprehensible distance? I don't know, but I can't fight it anymore. The angles, the distortion, they're not wrong. I am. I've been wrong from the beginning, thinking I could solve this, thinking I could make sense of it. But this isn't something that can be understood. Not by me, not by anyone. The angles were never the problem. They were the warning. And now, it's too late. I feel it now, more than ever. The presence, the entity, whatever it is. It's closer, its grip tightening. My thoughts aren't entirely my own anymore, and I can sense that. It's inside me, moving through me like a virus, infecting everything I once knew to be real. I'm not sure where I end and it begins, or if that line even exists anymore. I tried to keep it at bay, to hold on to my routines, to the small bits of normalcy that I could control. But the control was an illusion, just like everything else. Every time I wake up, I feel it has taken more of me. The space around me shifts, more distorted, more alien. My apartment, once a sanctuary, now feels like a prison. Every corner, every surface is a reminder of how wrong everything has become. I don't leave the apartment anymore. I can't. The outside world feels like it's unraveling faster than what's in here. I don't know if that's the entity's doing, or if I'm just losing my grip on everything. But I know this. It won't be long now. Sometimes I stand in front of the mirror, trying to see if I still recognize myself. I don't. Not anymore. My reflection looks off. There's a delay, a subtle one, like I'm watching a version of myself that's just out of sync with reality. And I swear, sometimes it moves on its own, shifting in ways I don't. I try not to look at it too long. The angles are everywhere now. I see them when I close my eyes, in every surface, in every thought. They bend and twist in ways I can't describe, defying everything I know about the physical world. I used to try to map them out, to make sense of them. But now, I think they're part of something bigger. Something that goes beyond logic, beyond mathematics, beyond anything a human mind can comprehend. And maybe that's the point. Maybe this thing, this entity, isn't meant to be understood. Maybe it exists outside of everything we know, in some place where the rules of reality don't apply. A place it's slowly dragging me toward, one distortion at a time. I don't know what will happen when I finally get there. Maybe I'll disappear entirely, consumed by whatever it is. Or maybe I'll become part of it, twisted and broken, like the angles that haunt me. But I can't stop it. It's already won. I just hope that, when it's over, there's nothing left of me to feel it. I'm not sure how much of me is still here, still thinking these thoughts. It feels like I'm slipping, losing pieces of myself each day, bit by bit, as if I'm being slowly erased. The entity doesn't need to rush. It knows I have nowhere to go, no way to escape. I don't even try anymore. The days blur together now, indistinguishable from one another. Time is slipping through my fingers, and I can't grasp it, can't hold on to any sense of what's real. I find myself standing in the middle of a room, staring at a corner that doesn't look right, for hours on end. Time passes, but I don't feel it. I just watch as the walls bend, twist, and warp, as if they're breathing, alive with some invisible force that I can't see but can feel in my bones. I used to think I could fight it, that if I could just figure it out, I could stop it. But now I know better. This thing, this presence, it's not something that can be fought or understood. It's something that simply is. It's beyond comprehension, beyond reason. It's been here all along, waiting for someone like me to notice, to unravel the delicate threads that hold reality together. And now that I have, it's too late. I can't even remember the last time I slept properly. The nightmares come as soon as I close my eyes. Endless spirals of numbers and shapes folding in on themselves, twisting into grotesque, impossible forms. And always, at the center of it all, is that dark, looming presence, watching me, waiting for the moment when I'm finally ready to be consumed. I think that moment is coming soon. There's no point in pretending anymore. No point in holding on to the routines, the familiar patterns of life. They've been broken, shattered by the weight of the entity's influence. My mind is slipping, and with it, my grip on reality. The angles, the distortions, they aren't just in the walls or the spaces around me. They're in me now, twisting me, reshaping me, pulling me towards something far darker than I ever imagined. And when it finally takes me, when I'm completely gone, will anyone even notice? Or will I simply fade into the folds of the impossible, just another casualty of a world that was never as solid, as real, as I once thought it to be? I don't know, but I think I'm about to find out. I can feel it now, in every breath, in every thought. The world is no longer what it once was, and I'm no longer who I used to be. I don't fight it anymore. I can't. The entity has rooted itself too deeply, entwined with everything I am or was. I'm just a vessel now, carrying this thing with me, letting it unravel me from the inside out. I've stopped trying to explain it, even to myself. There's no logic that applies here, no reasoning that can make sense of what's happening. The angles, the twisted spaces, the warped reflections, they're not mistakes or illusions. They're the truth, a truth I can no longer ignore. I wonder if this is what madness feels like, the slow descent into a place where nothing adds up, where reality bends and stretches in ways the human mind can't process. But it doesn't feel like madness. It feels like clarity, like I'm finally seeing things the way they really are. The walls of my apartment aren't just walls anymore. They're something else, something that shifts and breathes, something alive. The corners aren't sharp, they're curved, stretching into places I can't see, places I'm not meant to see. But I see them anyway. I see everything now. And it sees me. I've stopped trying to leave. There's nowhere to go. The city, the world, it's all the same. The angles, the distortions, they're everywhere, infecting everything. There's no escape because it's not just in my apartment. It's in me. It's always been in me. I've given up trying to understand it. There's no point. This thing, this presence, it's beyond comprehension, beyond anything I could have imagined. It's older than time, older than thought, and it's using me, bending me to its will. I don't even know who I am anymore, or if I ever really existed in the first place. Maybe that's the point. Maybe I was never real. Maybe I'm just another part of this twisted, incomprehensible reality, another angle that doesn't add up. And soon I'll be gone completely. I don't know what happens after that. I don't know if I'll vanish or if I'll become something else, something beyond human, something that exists in the spaces between. But I do know this. Whatever's left of me, whatever remains, won't be recognizable. It will belong to the entity. It will be the entity. And no one will ever know. I can barely feel anything now. It's as if my thoughts aren't even my own, as if my mind has become a labyrinth of corridors that lead to nowhere. The angles, the shifting geometry, it's all too much. Too much for a human brain to process, too much for anyone to understand. But I no longer care about understanding. That part of me has faded, just like everything else. I've stopped checking the clock, stopped measuring the angles. None of it matters. Time, space, the world. They're slipping away, and I'm slipping with them. There's a kind of peace in the inevitability of it all, a strange calm in knowing that soon I won't have to struggle against it anymore. The entity, the presence, it's one. Maybe it always had. The apartment is no longer recognizable. It's not an apartment anymore. It's just a collection of shapes, all wrong, all impossible. The walls bend and curve into oblivion, the floors stretch out into infinity, and I can't tell where one thing begins and another ends. It's like I'm floating in a sea of broken logic, drifting in and out of awareness, barely holding on to what's left of myself. But even that's fading now, the presence inside me, it's taking over. I can feel it, more clearly than ever before. It's pushing me out, erasing me, bit by bit, until there's nothing left but it. And I'm not scared anymore. Maybe I should be, but I'm not. There's no room for fear when you've accepted the inevitable. I wonder if this is what it feels like to dissolve, to become part of something larger, something incomprehensible. I wonder if, when it's done, there will be anything left of me at all, or if I'll simply vanish, like a forgotten thought, lost in the infinite angles and curves that twist around me. The last thing I feel before everything goes dark is the entity, fully merging with me. It's not angry, it's not even malicious. It just is. And then, I'm gone. Or maybe I never was. There's nothing left now, just a void where I used to be, a hollow space in the fabric of reality, folded and twisted beyond recognition. I don't know if I exist anymore or if I ever really did. The lines between me and the entity, between what was real and what was imagined, have blurred into nothingness. In the end, it wasn't about understanding. It wasn't about solving the puzzle of the angles or trying to make sense of the world around me. It was about accepting that some things aren't meant to be understood. Some things just are. They exist in the spaces between our perception, in the cracks of our reality, waiting for someone to notice them. I noticed. And now I'm part of it. Part of something older, something primal and incomprehensible, lurking just beyond the edges of the world we think we know. I'm not afraid anymore. There's no reason to be. Because whatever I am now, I'm not alone. I never was. And that's the final truth, isn't it? I was never alone. It had been with me from the beginning, lurking in the shadows, bending the world around me to fit its shape. I was just the last to realize it. There's a strange comfort in that knowledge, in knowing that I was part of something larger, something vast and ancient, even if it devoured me in the process. Maybe that's the only truth left. There's no escape from the things we can't comprehend. We can only surrender to them. Now, as I fade into whatever is left, I can feel the entity settle, satisfied. I've become part of the angles, part of the infinite, part of the dark spaces between what was once real. And as I dissolve into nothing, I understand, finally, that this was always the way it was meant to end. There's nothing more. No thoughts, no feelings, just silence, just the weight of an existence I no longer occupy. Whatever I was has been consumed, twisted, and folded into something far beyond what I could have ever understood. In the end, I didn't need to understand. All that was required of me was to notice, to let it in. And once it was inside, it no longer needed me. I am gone now. Just a ripple in the vast, endless void, another angle in the ever-shifting geometry of something much larger, something that waits patiently, just out of view, for someone else to notice. Because that's the thing about the unknown. It's always there, watching, waiting. And once it's seen, it can never be unseen. And with that final thought, I vanish. Dissolved, absorbed, whatever remains of me now, melded with the incomprehensible. The world outside continues, unaware of the invisible threads that bind reality to the shadows. No one will notice my absence. No one will remember. But it doesn't matter. The angles still shift. The spaces still bend. The entity moves quietly, subtly, within the cracks of existence, waiting for the next mind to see, the next life to distort. I am nothing now, just another forgotten part of the endless spiral. But it's still there, and it's still waiting. The waiting never ends. It's patient, relentless. It doesn't need time. It doesn't need recognition. It simply exists, pulling at the seams of reality, unseen by most, unnoticed by all but a few. And those who do notice, they become like me, consumed, lost in the void of angles and impossible spaces, their minds twisted beyond repair, their sense of self unraveled into nothingness. But it will continue. It always does. It's out there, still watching, still waiting. For the next one. For you.